Welcome, weary football pilgrims to Lowerleagues. You've come to the right place. The fire's low, the tea's gone cold, and the story you're about to hear is heavier than a sudden football on a December afternoon tonight. Our wandering star, our comet that briefly crashed to Earth, is not just a man but two. A trickster and a titan. A boy with bare feet and a god with golden ones. Diego and Maradona. You might think you know this tale, the one with the handball and the slalom and the shouting. And yes, it's in there like a goalmouth scramble in your memory. But stay with me now, because beneath the headlines and the hangovers lies something quieter, stranger, sadder, and holier than it has any right to be. There's a shirt somewhere, blue and white, number 10, hanging on a crooked nail in a room that smells of old leather and liniment. Not a shrine, just laundry, faded from too many summers, too many tears. The kind of shirt you don't wash because it smells of something you once were, or might have been. It was never just a kit. It was armor. It was theater curtains. It was the weight of a country's longing stitched into polyester, and inside it two selves trying to share the same stage. Two voices arguing inside one set of lungs. Two men wore that shirt. Or perhaps one man and one myth. One tethered to the earth, the other floating just out of reach. Diego, he was the boy. Born in a shantytown where the only thing more common than hunger was hope. He juggled oranges for laughs and shared his mother's rations with his sisters. He played because it was the only place he could be free. And he smiled. God, how he smiled. Like someone who just nicked a pie from the windowsill of heaven. Then there was Maradona. Maradona did not smile. He sneered, he roared, he wept. He punched footballs into nets and veered between ecstasy and exile like a saint with a nosebleed. He was a sacred jester worshipped by millions, misunderstood by all, sent down to earth not to save us, but to make us feel everything, all at once. He didn't walk, he swaggered. He didn't train, he conjured. Every touch was an argument against gravity. Every goal a protest against fate. He was both the sermon and the sin, often in the same passage of play, a saint 1 minute, a rogue the next, like a choir boy nicking the collection plate on his way to hitting a top C. They shared a body, but never a life. Diego longed for quiet. Maradona fed on noise. Diego gave hugs. Maradona gave goals. Diego prayed to the Virgin. Maradona was one veiled in myth, dragged through tabloids, always rising, always falling. Sometimes he'd stare into a mirror and not quite recognize the man looking back. A stranger in his own story. The boy had vanished, and the reflection was all Maradona now. A mask grown permanent, smiling with someone else's mouth. The tragedy wasn't in the mistakes, not the drugs, or the women, or the chaos. It was the slow erasure of Diego. The quieter self, the one who wanted to go home early and eat with his mother. You'll hear about the goals and the glory, but you'll also hear the groaning weight of a man trying to carry his own statue. The public altar, always polished, always lit, while behind it, behind the marble, the man was limping, alone. There's something cruel about the kind of love that lifts you too high. It sings your name, it lights flares for you, but it never lets you leave the stage. Diego was adored, yes, but never gently. Never in a way that let him rest. Some say Diego died young, maybe in Naples, maybe in Buenos Aires, maybe the first time he realized he couldn't go back to being ordinary. But Maradona, he refused to stop living, lurching from miracle to mayhem like a prophet with no off switch, rising again and again in the theater of resurrection, dragged on stage for one more encore. He became his own echo, repeated in chants and tattoos and grainy footage, a man split in two, walking backwards through time, pursued by the version of himself the world demanded. There were days he must have wondered where Diego had gone, whether he had been buried beneath the applause, lost in a pile of newspaper clippings, or locked away in the box of child things he no longer had the key for. And yet, even in the wildest moments, even when the lights were harshest and the nights longest, there were flickers, a grin after a goal, a moment of care with a teammate, the glint of something fragile and deeply human behind the theater. The story then is not of a single rise and fall. It is a tale of splitting of a boy who just wanted to play, and the man who became a monument with boots on, a carnival and a cautionary tale all rolled into one. So get into your favored sleep position or find your most comfortable armchair, ideally one that reclines like a perfectly weighted pass. You'll hear the miracles. The slalom in Mexico. The rapture in Naples. The crowd singing for a chubby kid to juggle an orange forever. But you'll also meet the mess. The fake urine. The mafia, the broken hotel doors, the long silent drives through cities that never quite knew how to love him. Not cleanly. Anyway. Diego was adored, yes, but never gently. Never in a way that let him rest. Because when you were born in mud and ascend too quickly, the world keeps asking you to rise again and again until there's nothing left to lift. Prepare to be amused, perhaps a little saddened, and ultimately profoundly mesmerized by the story of Diego Maradona, the genius who slipped a football through God's legs and kept running. We begin as all good stories should, at the very beginning. A beginning that felt anything but slow, unless you were the defender he'd just left on the turf. So settle in. Let's begin. Maradona. Or maybe still. Just Diego. Chapter 1. Born in a Shantytown, forged in Defiance. So, we begin in Villa Fiorito. It sounds almost poetic, doesn't it, the flower town? But it wasn't a place you'd find on a postcard. It was a place less drawn on maps than smudged across them. A sprawl of tin roofs and cracked earth on the southern edge of Buenos Aires, where the streets flooded easily, but the dreams never quite washed away. This was the kingdom of mud, a place where the wind carried the smell of the Riachuelo River, a smell that would cling to your clothes and your memories. He was born there on October 30, 1960, the fifth child, but the first boy, and already something mythic in a home of 4 daughters. The family lived in a shack stitched together from wood and corrugated iron, with no running water, no electricity, and a bathroom that was more suggestion than structure. Poverty didn't visit Villa Fiorito. It settled in and grew roots. But it was the kind of poverty that made poets or pickpockets, often both. To the Argentine elite, he was un negro de la villa, a slur as loaded as a revolver. A sneer of class and race packed into 5 words, but Diego wore it like armor. Like a bandage and a battle cry all at once. He knew the eyes that watched him, what they expected, and what they feared. His life story could be written in the shape of 2 early relics. His life story really could be written in the shape of 2 early relics. 2 moments, one of light, one of darkness. First, the light had arrived when he was 3 years old. A gift from his uncle Cirilo, a small leather football, and this wasn't a toy, it was a talisman. The family story, worn smooth with retelling, is that he hugged it to his chest and slept with it all night. Tucked under his shirt like a second secret heart, in a world where most things could be taken. This was the one thing that danced only for him. When he woke and it was still there, that's when the ministry began. He took it everywhere. He'd be sent for bread and come back 2 hours later covered in dust, the bread forgotten. But he'd have taught the ball a new trick. He wasn't just playing with it. He was in a deep and frankly slightly weird conversation with it. It was a partnership, a conspiracy, a level of devotion that was faintly unnerving, like watching a shepherd with a single perfectly obedient sheep. A sheep that could nutmeg an unsuspecting uncle on its way to the pen. This was all watched over by his mother, Doña Tota. She presided over their small house on Azamor Street. No running water, 3 rooms for 10 people, and performed the daily miracle of turning nothing into something. It was here Diego learned his first most important lesson. He saw his mother pretend to have a stomachache at dinner, just so there was enough for the kids. What a lie, he said later. That's why I love my old lady so much. One quiet sacrifice that screamed into his bones, a motivation so pure it was almost dangerous. A rocket strapped to the back of a small boy with no steering wheel. And then there was the second relic. The darkness. Not a metaphor, not yet. A literal sewer. A dark, wet trench in the dirt lanes of Fiorito. One night, a young Diego, still small enough to be swallowed by the world, lost his footing and tumbled in a pit of what he would later call communal shit. He began to sink. It was his uncle Cirilo who pulled him out, the same uncle who'd given him the football, who saw him flailing in the filth and dragged him back into the light. Years later, Diego would return to that moment. In interviews and dreams, it became the central metaphor in time. The boy who falls and is lifted. The sewage and the stars, he walked for the rest of his life like someone who knew they might fall again, but had already rehearsed the climb. His genius wasn't born in a vacuum, it was choked into shape by smog and hunger and the soft cruelty of indifference. He didn't play football to win, he played because the ball never judged him, because it was the one thing that didn't ask for ID, didn't care if his shoes had holes or his belly had nuts. He didn't play to escape the slum. He played so that the slum could see itself just once on a screen, on pitch, on the lips of the world. Every nutmeg was a protest, every goal a love letter to the people who never got out. He wasn't just a boy with a ball, he was the rebellion made flesh, and he was only just beginning. Chapter 2, The Miracle of the Little Onions. The discovery of Diego Maradona is the sort of story that feels like it was written backwards, from canonization to cradle, polished smooth by the tongues of 1,000 retellings. It begins not with grandeur, but with something small, something onion-sized. It begins, as these things so often do, with a mate saying, "You should see this lad." The mate was a wiry kid named Goyo Carrizo. The man he said it to was Francis Cornejo, a youth coach for Argentinos juniors, a man whose job it was to pan for gold in a river of mud. A few days later, an 8-year-old Diego showed up. He was wearing a threadbare green shirt, battered blue trainers. His socks sagged like overworked goalposts. But then the ball was rolled to him, and something ancient stirred. Cornejo thought he was watching a trick. The boy moved like gravity was just a friendly suggestion. The ball was tethered to his feet by an invisible string. It was so far beyond the realm of possibility that Cornejo's professional, world-weary brain couldn't accept it. He reached the only conclusion that made any sense. Un enano mentiroso, a lying dwarf. He was convinced this was some kind of elaborate prank. He demanded to see an ID card. Diego didn't have one. He just had a talent so absurd it made grown men deeply suspicious. Cornejo would later write, with the reverence of a true convert, "They say people witness at least one miracle in their lives. I certainly did mine." It was a rainy Saturday in 1969. And with that, the miracle had a team. He became the heartbeat of Los Cebolitas, the Little Onions, a nickname of equal parts tenderness and comedy. With Diego among them, they became something else entirely. They went through 26 games unbeaten, which is another way of saying they simply forgot how to lose. But here, his teammates, lads like Claudio El Mono Rodriguez, they remembered him not as a phenomenon, but as a friend, a boy who loved rock and roll, who danced more than he talked, who'd be in the middle of a game of hide and seek 1 minute, then casually slip a no-look pass to you the next. They shared everything. Coins for the bus, sandwiches split 4 ways. Some days they walked home just to afford a soda. El Mono once watched him at a party, see a carnival hat on the floor flick up with his toe and land it perfectly on his own head. He didn't rehearse it. He just did it. and laughed. That was Diego happy, generous, alive. But something else was stirring. A different boy was starting to answer to the same name. One who understood that the crowd wanted more than just goals. At 12, he became the half-time act for the senior side. A ball boy by title, a magician by trade. He'd juggle oranges, pebbles, a bottle cap. The crowd, they didn't want the second half to start. They just wanted him. The first chant of his name wasn't for a goal. It was for encore. This was Maradona beginning to hatch. And with Maradona came the fire during a match. Cornejo gave a tactical instruction. Maradona didn't agree. He looked his coach in the eye, this 12-year-old boy, and said, "If you don't like it, take me off." Cornejo, stunned, did just that. For a moment, the boy sat on the sidelines. Quiet. Smoldering, the performer benched the rebel born. It was all happening so fast. His sister Maria would later say, "My brother at 15, he stopped having a life." And maybe that's the truth of it. It wasn't a sudden event, not a door slamming shut. It was more of a creeping tide. The water rising so slowly you don't realize you're drowning. The whispers about the miracle boy escaped the dusty confines of the youth league. They found their way into smoky cafes, onto the back pages of newspapers. Men in suits, men who'd never set foot in Villa Fiorito, started saying his name. They spoke of him not as a boy, but as an asset. A commodity. Calculating his future worth like he was a prize bull at a country fair. Suddenly, the ball wasn't just his friend anymore. It was his resume. Every juggle, every dribble was a line item on a ledger he couldn't see. And when you put a price on joy, it has a funny way of curdling. The easy freedom of the Betrayal was being replaced by the pressure of the audition. Even with his friends, the lads he shared his sandwiches with, a new sound began to creep into their laughter. Awe and awe is a lonely, cold country to live in. It builds a quiet wall around you, brick by invisible brick. He was becoming his own myth. A ghost haunting his own childhood, while he was still trying to live it. And so it began. The onion peeled back layer by layer. One child, two names. One destiny, multiple selves. Miracle, wearing borrowed boots. Chapter 3. The sky in his hands. The transition from youth sensation to the senior team wasn't a gentle climb. It wasn't a staircase. It was a slingshot. A sudden, violent launch from local folklore to national fixation. One moment, you're a boy juggling oranges for loose change at halftime. The next, you're a teenage messiah with mud on your knees, stepping over the chalk line of destiny. On October 20, 1976, just 10 days short of his 16th birthday, Diego Maradona stepped onto the pitch for Argentinos juniors. He wasn't legally allowed to drive a car, but he was, apparently, cleared to dismantle the confidence of grown men in front of thousands of people. As he stood on the touchline, his manager, Juan Carlos Montes, leaned in and gave him a line worthy of a scriptwriter. Go, Diego. Play as you know how. And if you can, nutmeg someone. It was less a tactical instruction and more of a prophecy. He did his very first act in professional football was to slip the ball between the legs of the unfortunate Juan Domingo Cabrera, A little whisper of a move that shouted across the entire pitch. I'm here. The crowd didn't roar, just a soft, drawn-out Ole. Maradona said later. That day I felt I had held the sky in my hands. The call-up for Argentina came almost immediately. At just 16, he was pulling on the sacred blue and white shirt. He now had the weight of a club and a country on his small shoulders. And with a World Cup on home soil looming in 1978, it seemed a certainty that this boy wonder would be part of it. But he wasn't. In the final cut, the coach, Cesar Luis Menotti, a man who looked more like a melancholy poet than a football manager, made a tough decision. He left Diego out. He was, Menotti reasoned, too young to handle the crushing pressure. The news broke Maradona's heart. He sat under a tree and cried for hours. It was his first great footballing tragedy, a public rejection that stung him to his core. That sadness, it didn't just disappear. It curdled into something else, a hard, cold stone of resentment that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. A fuel. At club level, over the next 5 years, he played like a man who owned the sky. Argentinos Juniors was a small club, a humble club. Now, by some cosmic accident, they had a god in their midst. He never won a title with them. But he gave them something more valuable. He gave them miracles every other Sunday, and the numbers. They were just plain silly. He was the top scorer in the Argentine league 5 times in a row. From 1978 to 1980, no one in the entire country scored more goals. It was like watching a child win a Monopoly game against his parents, not just taking all the money, but buying the bank, the board, and the box it came in. In 1979, while the senior team were world champions, it was the World Youth Championship in Japan where Argentina's future was truly forged. Diego was its leader. He wasn't just a player. He was the captain, the heartbeat, the general. He was magnificent, leading the team to victory, winning the golden ball for the tournament's best player. It was a glorious, defiant answer to the world and to Menotti. It was a message. Of course, this kind of genius doesn't go unnoticed or unchallenged. In 1980, before a match against the mighty Boca Juniors, their legendary goalkeeper, Hugo El Loco Gatti, a man famous for his swagger and his headband, made a mistake. He was asked about the teenage wonder, and he casually told a journalist that Maradona was good, yes, but a bit overhyped. And he added, a little fatty. You do not call Diego Maradona a fatty. It's like poking a bear with a short stick. It's like telling a volcano it's a bit over-enthusiastic. Diego read the comments, and a quiet, cold fury settled in him. He told the press Gatti was jealous, and nobody. Then he walked onto the pitch and he put 4 goals past him, 4-1 from a penalty, 1 from a free kick that sailed over Gatti's head like a pre-written punchline, and 2 more just for good measure. Argentinos won 5-3. The little fatty had devoured the lion in his own den. But even as he dismantled them, he dreamt of joining them. His father's wish, to see him in the blue and gold of Boca, was a constant whisper in his ear. And he made that dream real in the most Maradona way imaginable, by telling a beautiful, magnificent lie with River Plate, Boca's mortal enemy. Circling with checkbooks, Diego took a call from a journalist. Is it true you're going to River? And Diego, with the straight face of a master poker player, said no, because Boca called me. They had to that interview hit the press. Well, they had to, didn't they? He forced their hand with a smile and a story, which is the most polite way of saying he told a beautiful, magnificent lie on national radio. The transfer was sealed, a messy deal partially paid for in dodgy apartments he later said were made of cardboard. The kind of flats where the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbor having a quiet existential crisis, or just changing their mind about what to have for tea. He didn't care. He was home. And in 1981 he delivered the promised land the Metropolitano Championship. It was a brutal, tight campaign won by a single point. But he dragged them over the line. He wasn't just a player. He was a force of nature wearing the number 10. And in the Super Classico against River Plate, he painted his masterpiece. He received the ball, slalom past a defender, Alberto Tarantini, and found himself one-on-one with Ubaldo Filho, El Pato, the Duck, the goalkeeper of the World Cup winning national team, one of the best on the planet. And Diego. He paused. He stopped time, let Filho sprawl on the floor in desperation, and then with the gentle smirk of a man who knew the cameras were watching, he tapped the ball into the empty net. He wasn't just a star anymore. He was a champion. Something had shifted. Diego, the boy who cried under trees, who danced rock and roll with his mates, who split sandwiches 4 ways, was starting to blur around the edges. Maradona, the idol, the brand, the symbol, was coming into focus. The Boca Hinchada didn't just cheer for him. They worshipped him. They painted his face on walls, sang his name long after the match had ended, waved banners that turned him into myth before he turned 21. It was intoxicating and terrifying. This was his first true taste of worship, not affection, not admiration, but something more fervent, more possessive. He was no longer just a player. He was a vessel, a flag, a cause. And it would not be the last time. He had fulfilled his promise to his father. He had answered his critics. He had conquered his home. Maradona said that after his debut, he felt he had held the sky in his hands. By the time he left for Europe, that sky was full of domestic titles, individual awards, international glory, and the burning memory of heartbreak. But the sky, once you've held it in your hands, has a funny way of getting heavier, and it never, ever lets you put it down again. Chapter 4. The Butcher, the Boardroom, and Barcelona's Betrayal. After the madness of Boca came the machine of Barcelona, a world record transfer fee, a number that sounded less like a salary and more like the gross domestic product of a small nation. A figure so large it seemed to hang in the air above him, a heavy, invisible crown. He was no longer the golden boy of La Boca. He was the prized jewel of Catalonia. And a jewel is meant to be kept in a pristine box, under heavy glass, to be admired, quietly. Diego, you will have gathered, was not a quiet man, and he was not built for boxes. He was there for just 2 seasons. A brief, violent, and unforgettable flicker. Barcelona expected not a footballer, but a king who could deliver a new dynasty. The pressure was immediate, but the first test came not with his club, instead with his country at the 1982 World Cup, held in his new home, Spain. He arrived as the planet's most expensive player, expected to deliver glory. Instead, he found himself a marked man in the match against Italy. He was hunted by Claudio Gentile, a defender who treated the rule book like a list of mild suggestions. Gentile committed 23 fouls on him. A one-man campaign of harassment. It was a brutal welcome to the cynical side of European football. The tournament ended in disgrace, frustrated, kicked from pillar to post, and losing to Brazil, the red mist descended. He lunged studs up at the midsection of the Brazilian player Batista. It was a foul of pure, unadulterated frustration. The red card was inevitable. His first senior World Cup ended, not with a trophy, but with a walk of shame. He returned to a club that didn't know what to do with him. His first season was then derailed by a bout of hepatitis, a cruel blow for a body already battered by fouls. He'd walk into the boardroom, all emotion and instinct, and be met with men in suits who looked at him like a particularly volatile stock market investment. They wanted his magic on the pitch, but they wanted him to be silent and obedient of it. It was like buying a volcano and then complaining about the lava. In his own words, he felt they treated him like a spoiled gutter boy. The loneliness was profound. Adrift in a city that admired his feet but seemed suspicious of his soul, and it was here, in the emptiness after the roar, in the chasm between the boy Diego and the icon Maradona, that he found a new way to cope. A new dark friend, cocaine, a quiet, deadly release valve for a life that had no other way of letting off steam. The first step on a very, very long road. His second season brought a different kind of pain. On the 24th of September 1983, the violence became personal. It acquired a name. Andoni Goicoechea, a defender for Athletic Bilbao, whose nickname tells you everything you need to know. The Butcher of Bilbao. Goicoechea didn't tackle Maradona, he hunted him. The challenge, when it came, was from behind, a sickening, brutal act of footballing cynicism. It wasn't a tackle for the ball, it was a tackle for the man. The sound of it, a dry crack, echoed around the stadium. Maradona's ankle was shattered, and he was out for what took 6 days, nearly 4 months. It was the sound of a master craftsman's hands being deliberately broken with a hammer. He came back, of course, he always came back. He spent the winter not in the sun of training pitches, but in physiotherapy rooms and sterile clinics, learning to walk without pain before he could even think about dancing past defenders again. When he came back, it was for revenge. The 1984 Copa del Rey. Final, Barcelona versus Athletic Bilbao in the stands. Sat the King of Spain himself on the pitch, simmered a hatred so thick you could taste it. At the final whistle, with Barcelona having lost, it all exploded. And Diego was the detonator. He confronted a player, there was an insult. And then, a headbutt followed by an elbow. A ballet of kung fu kicks and flying fists erupted. All in front of royalty. It was his final chaotic act in a Barcelona shirt. A full-scale riot in front of the King of Spain, which as a career move is generally considered to be bold. It was the boy from the Betrayal taking over. A reminder that when the Marquis of Queensberry rules go out the window, the rules of the car park brawl tend to make a swift and dramatic entrance. He had arrived in Spain, a genius meant to light up La Liga. He left it in disgrace. A brawler, an addict, a man betrayed by the dream of European glory. 2 seasons, a couple of domestic cups, and a legacy of 38 goals in 58 games, beautiful goals overshadowed by illness, injury, and infamy. The Barcelona experiment was a failure, but it was a necessary one. He had to be broken by the machine, so he could find a city that ran on pure, unfiltered, glorious chaos. Because sometimes, saviors don't build temples. They walk into them already burning. They don't seek a flock, but still they find one, chanting their name before it's even spoken. He had to fall before he could be resurrected. And this time, the resurrection would not be symbolic. It would be total, not a return, but a second coming. A flawed Messiah, drawn not to greatness, but to need a city scorned by the north, wild, wounded, worshipful. Naples was waiting. Chapter 5, The King of Naples. Before we get to Naples, you have to understand what Serie A was back then. It wasn't just a football league in the 1980s, it was the center of the known universe. Milan catwalk of superstars, where every weekend was a clash of gods. All the money, all the glamour, all the talent, it was here. The French king, Michel Platini, was conducting symphonies at Juventus, alongside the brilliant Poles Zbigniew Bonik. The fearsome German striker, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, was a blonde predator for Inter Milan. And the Brazilians were here too, the divine Zico, painting masterpieces for little Udinese, and the philosopher king, Socrates, gracing the pitch for Fiorentina. It was a galaxy of talent, and into this galaxy, into a league of champions and legends, walked Diego Maradona. But he didn't join the aristocrats at Juventus or the giants of Milan. He went to Napoli for a world record fee of £6.9 million. The planet's greatest player joined a club that had just been rescued from relegation. It made no sense. Rumors had it the local mafia. The Camorra had greased the wheels, but emotionally, it was the only move that mattered. Naples was the bruised heart of Italy's poor. Scorned south, a city mocked by the north. Waved off as an exile within its own country, a punchline in northern jokes, fans of Juventus would greet them with banners reading, "Welcome to Italy," as if they'd landed from Mars. They were mocked as Africans, plague carriers, filth, and Diego, the barrio kid, saw himself in them. The differences between northern and southern Italy, he later said, gave me the chance to fight for a cause. His arrival wasn't a transfer, it was a second coming. Over 85,000 jammed into the Stadio San Paolo. Not for a game, but just to witness his existence. One local paper captured it perfectly. "We have no mayor, no schools, no buses, but none of this matters, because we have Maradona." He looked out at them and understood, "I want to become the idol of the poor children of Naples, because they are like me." In his first season, he scored 14 goals, the third highest in that league of killers, but the team, not yet built in his image, hovered in mid-table, finishing 8th after a strong second half of the season in which they lost only one of the last 17 matches. It was a solo mission, a one-man argument against the established order. The team was still forming around him. Off-pitch, his life pulsed with excess, guarded by the Giuliano clan. Nights blurred into cocaine-fueled orgies. Detoxes became ritual. Salvation came on Sundays. The next season, 1985 to 86, things began to change. A new coach, Ottavio Bianchi, arrived, new players, like the experienced Bruno Giordano, who came in to form two-thirds of what would become the famous Magica attacking trio. The team had begun to mold around its new king. They soared to third place, securing a European spot. The belief was taking root, and on November 3rd, 1985, that belief was given its gospel. Napoli would play in the champions, Platini's Juventus. They were awarded an indirect free kick inside the penalty box, a ridiculous situation. The ball was far too close to get it up and over the wall of Juventus giants. It was a geometric impossibility. The referee himself asked if they were serious. And then, it happened. A teammate rolled the ball a few inches, and Diego, with the outside of his left boot, didn't kick it. He scooped it. He flicked it. He sent it on a trajectory that simply shouldn't exist outside of a cartoon. He scooped it, like he was trying to get the last olive out of a jar with a fork. It floated over the wall and nestled in the top corner. The stadium fell silent for a moment. A collective, city-wide processing error, like 80,000 brains trying to solve an equation that had no answer. Then, it erupted. Maradona had arrived on the pitch. He drove Napoli forward with dagger passes, solo dribbles from midfield, curling set pieces. He converted critical matches, a brace in a 3-2 win over Milan, a decisive free kick to beat Roma. Each moment fed the myth. That season they had laid the groundwork. In the locker room, Diego cracked jokes and swapped stories with teammates. But when the crowd roared, Maradona stepped forward. He pointed to the badge, raw pride blazing. Napoli surged to third place behind Juventus, the champions, and Roma. They won 5 of their last 6 matches. The UEFA Cup beckoned. The belief flowered. He had anchored a kingdom of glorious chaos, and proven that not even the laws of physics could stop him. Off the pitch, the Camorra's shadow grew. Giuliano, clan boss, offered protection and pockets of cash, whispered warnings, and unspoken pacts. His life was a swirl of glitzy nights, whispered deals, brief detoxes, and Sunday salvation. But Diego needed more. Maradona demanded it. There were banners to be lifted, and battles still to fight. The 1986 World Cup in Mexico awaited. Chapter 6, Mexico, 86. The hand of God, the feet of genius. Argentina arrived in Mexico in 1986 not as favorites, but as underdogs wearing the ghosts of past failures. Their training camp was Spartan. 1 telephone, a single TV, and a daily allowance of just $25. It was a world away from the luxury of the European giants. Yet, it was in this scarcity. His teammate, Jorge Valdano, later said that a transformation miracle occurred. An us against the world band of brothers was forged. And at the heart of this pack stood a captain who was nothing like the superstar the world imagined away from the lights. This was Diego in the flesh. The prankster who once terrified a teammate with a gorilla mask. The quiet leader who never once lashed out for a misplaced pass. His roommate, Giulio Lardacuccia, spoke of walking on tiptoe past his door, so fearful was he of disturbing the captain and somehow jinxing the team's chances. The tournament began, and the world noticed. In the group stages, Diego toyed with South Korea, then scored a blistering goal against Italy taking a ball over his shoulder in one smooth motion before rifling it past Giovanni Galli. It was a goal of pure instinct, of geometry and muscle memory in perfect accord. In the knockout stages, he lifted them again, a goal against Uruguay, a darting, angled run, precise and unspectacular. Except that it was him. Even the ordinary looked touched by myth. Then came England in the quarter-final in Mexico City. A match imbued with the political weight of the Falklands War, thick with political venom. Just 4 years after the conflict, and it would be here that Maradona would become more than a player. And the first goal, well, you know the one. A miss-hit clearance balloons into the Mexican air. Out comes Peter Shilton, a fine keeper, a man who looks for all the world like a respectable provincial bank manager. And up goes Diego, all 5'4" of him. He wasn't going to win that header, not unless he'd brought a small step ladder with him. So he did the next most logical thing, he punched it. A sly, cheeky, perfectly legal little jab with the left fist hidden from the ref but not from God, or the 27 television cameras pointing at him. It was the work of a street urchin, a hustler from the Potrero, a little with the head of Maradona he'd later quip, and a little with the hand of God. His teammates called it plain genius. The English, well, they called it something else entirely, and you can't say it on the radio. It was the single greatest act of footballing larceny ever committed in broad daylight. A trick you pull to win a tenner off your mates, somehow performed on the biggest stage of all. Then, just 4 minutes later, came the sermon. He scored what would be christened the goal of the century. He picked the ball up in his own half and began to run. Not fast, but inevitable. He danced past Beardsley, skipped over Raid, weaved between Butcher and Fenwick, and rounded Shilton to roll it in. 70 meters, 10.8 seconds. 5 men turned into statues. Gary Lineker, England's striker, said he wanted to applaud Terry. Butcher saw him later in the doping room and asked. Wordlessly, Diego simply pointed to his own hand. A mute confession. Or maybe just the final punchline. He remained both trickster and saint for the remainder of the tournament. A duality in motion in the semi-final against Belgium. They tried every marking tactic, every defensive ploy. But Diego was a fluid idea, impossible to pin down. His first goal. Oh, his first goal was poetry in motion. It didn't roar in like a thunderclap, it whispered. A flickering shuffle of feet, a tiny stoop as the ball met his boot, and a finish so casual, so assured it looked like a warm-up drill. The net barely sighed. But that was the trickster speaking, making brilliance appear ordinary. And then, the second goal. Pure Maradona. He picked up a loose ball in midfield and simply began to drift, step by step, shoulder drop, hips moving a fraction ahead of his feet, like water flowing around rocks. A solo, arcing slalom, time didn't stop. It seemed unsure what to do next. The defense fell away. Breath held, then exhaled as he slipped the ball past the keeper. By then, it wasn't just a goal. It was a declaration. This is what genius looks like, unmasked. Then came the final West Germany, a side built from steel necessity and disciplined brutality. They clawed their way back from 2-0 to 2-2, each goal a reminder that football is often won in gritted teeth, not grace. But with 6 minutes left, with exhaustion starting to seep into every limb, Diego raised his head. He saw his chance. He didn't glide past defenders this time. He didn't dance around them. He didn't even shoot. He passed. Not any pass, but a blind, curved, threaded miracle of vision. It cut through German steel like a blade through silk. It found the perfect path, the perfect moment. And Jorge Burricaga, the man on the end of it, slotted it home. It wasn't just football intelligence. It was prophecy in that moment. Diego didn't just create a goal. He carved the memory of the tournament of a nation into the history of the game. Argentina were champions, and Maradona wasn't a man anymore, he was myth. 5 goals, 5 assists, he had carried a nation, lifted them not just to glory, but to immortality. In Mexico, the mask and the man finally merged for one glorious summer. The humble, unifying Diego and the sublime, arrogant Maradona walked together as one. The god of football and the boy from Villa Fiorito became inseparable under the Mexican sun. Chapter 7, The Wonder Years. When Diego Maradona stepped off the plane in Naples after Mexico '86, he wasn't just their king anymore. He was a god who had walked among mortals and returned with proof of his divinity in his hand. The city, already simmering with admiration, erupted. Street vendors began singing hymns on the spot. Church bells rang as though called by destiny. Blue flags sprouted from every pole, every balcony. The air itself trembled with worship. They called the 1986-87 season a religious procession. And they weren't wrong with Maradona as high priest. An ascendant Napoli moved through Serie A with uncanny swagger and near prophetic fervor on May 10, 1987. After months of edge-of-your-seat tension and flashes of genius, Napoli lifted their first ever Serie A trophy. The city didn't just cheer. It exploded. Mock funerals roamed the streets for Juventus and AC Milan, coffins borne by joyous mourners. Walls, buses, children's faces. Everything wore Napoli's sky blue badge. It wasn't just a party. It was a social revolution. The humbled South had scorched the arrogance of the North. To understand the scale of the feat, you need to know who they defeated. Juventus, champions of Europe, with Niccolo Platini conducting symphonies from midfield, Milan packed with talent like Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten. Inter, with the ruthless Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, all the money, glamour and legacy stood between Maradona and a miracle. Napoli matched them all. In the Nova '86, they stunned Juventus 3-1 at the Stadio San Paolo, Maradona netting a brace. In February, he scored twice in a 3-1 win at Udinese, another signature strike. That season, Napoli went 15 wins, 12 draws, only 3 losses. Top of the league, Maradona finished with 10 goals and 10 assists. A whisper for a magic trickster who lifted the whole team. Behind him stood unsung heroes. Defender Ciro Ferrara anchoring the backline, midfield maestro Francesco Romano pulling strings, and of course Bruno Giordano, Italy's capocannoniere, whose predatory instincts complemented Maradona's artistry.
The Cup followed Napoli conquered the Coppa Italia, a 4-0 aggregate win over Brescia in the quarters, a clean sheet in the semis, and with Giordano scoring a tournament-leading 10 goals, they completed the domestic double. Off the pitch, the Camora's shadow thickened. The Giuliano clan offered protection and wrapped him in whispered threats and cash. His routine spiraled, wild nights, tense detoxes, mafia whispers, and the burden of being both icon and hostage. After that triumph, the kingdom armed itself further for the 1987-88 season. The Brazilian striker Careca, a man with silken feet and ice in his veins, arrived. He joined Maradona and the lion like Bruno Giordano to complete the attacking trio the fans christened Magica. Careca, the ice-veined Brazilian, smooth as marble Giordano, the prowler, predator, lion-hearted, and Maradona. The Tempest. Together, they weren't a front line. They were a fable. This era wasn't about strategy. It was spectacular storytelling. Each weekend, free kicks curled from Maradona's boot as if scribbled by angels. Giordano prowled the penalty area. Careca's silky strike announced their devastating harmony. They stormed to the top of the table, looking certain to retain their crown, but the great AC Milan side of Arrigo Sacchi, a tactical machine powered by the Dutch masters Gullit and Van Basten, was hunting them. The season came down to result in a head-to-head showdown in Naples. A cathedral of 80,000 Neapolitans came to see their king crowned again. But instead they witnessed a tragedy. In a frantic, heartbreaking match, Milan beat them 3-2, a fatal blow that saw the title slip through their fingers. The heartbreak only made them hungrier. The following season, 1988-89, the league title proved even more elusive. A powerful Inter Milan side, built around the German titans Lothar Matthäus and Andreas Brehme and anchored by the legendary keeper Walter Zenga, ran away with the Scudetto, leaving Napoli a distant and frustrated second. But if the domestic crown was lost, a continent remained to be conquered. That hunger was now channeled into Europe. The UEFA Cup campaign became the city's obsession, its dream made real. The run was a gauntlet in the quarterfinals. They faced their hated rivals, Juventus, and dramatically overturned a first-leg deficit to win in extra time at a furious San Paolo. In the semi-finals, they slayed another giant, the mighty Bayern Munich. Then came the two-legged final against Stuttgart. In the first leg in Naples, a tense, ferocious affair. Maradona calmly slotted home a penalty before Careca snatched a late winner. They took a slender 2-1 lead to Germany. The second leg was a wild, chaotic masterpiece, a 3-3 draw of breathtaking intensity with Maradona as the creator, the puppet master pulling the strings, providing the key assists. At the final whistle, he celebrated wildly on German soil. He had done it. He had brought a European trophy to Naples. Then came the war for the 1989-90 Scudetto. This was a different kind of campaign, fought against a backdrop of the greatest league in the world. There was AC Milan's royalty, the Dutch immortals Gullit, Van Basten, and Rijkaard, shielded by the legendary Baresi and Maldini. There was Inter Milan, powered by their own German triumvirate of Matthias Brehme and Klinsmann. And there was Juventus with the divine ponytail of a young Roberto Baggio beginning to shine. And amidst this brutal war, a new artist was learning his craft in the master's shadow. A young, gifted Italian named Gianfranco Zola had joined the squad, serving as Maradona's understudy. It said Gianfranco Zola would linger at training, not to practice, but to witness. A young sorcerer's apprentice learning the secrets of the spell, watching Diego bend physics into poetry, as though the secrets of flight might be revealed by repetition. This title wouldn't be won with poetry, it would be won in the mud.
The season turned on pure chaos in a crucial match in Bergamo. Napoli's midfielder Aleo was struck by a coin thrown from the crowd. Amidst controversy and accusations of gamesmanship, Napoli were awarded a 2-2 victory they had not earned on the pitch. Milan, in turn, stumbled in Verona, forfeiting a match over supposed floodlight failure. It was a title race fought as much in the corridors of power as on the pitch.
On the final day, Napoli needed a victory against Lazio to seal it. The Stadio San Paolo was a cauldron of unbearable tension, until a single goal broke the fever. At the final whistle, they collapsed in exhausted triumph. It wasn't a beautiful victory. It was a victory carved out of pure will, street smarts, and an absolute refusal to be denied. Napoli, who'd won 12 of their final 15 matches, were crowned champions, 2 points ahead of Milan, who went on to win the European Cup for the second year in a row. But while Maradona, the savior, gleamed in the floodlights, inside, Diego was fraying his cocaine habit. Once a hidden salve, had become a shadowed companion. Detox trips punctuated euphoric match days. The Giuliano clan of the Camorra offered protection. But in whispers and envelopes, they claimed a piece of him. At home, a son, Diego Sanagra, was born and denied. He, the idol of poor children, rejected his own for years. Naples adored him. Yet from the alleys came watchful eyes, a gilded cage he had willingly walked into. In that golden era, 2 Scudetti, a Coppa Italia, a UEFA Cup, they had asked him for miracles, he had given them an avalanche. But for a man elevated that high, the fall was only a matter of time. And it would be long, slow, and devastating. Chapter 8. Italia 90, the Southern Kings' final stand. In the summer of 1990, football's world revolved around one man. In one country, Diego Maradona arrived in Italy for Italia 90, as both monarch and exile. He was the reigning World Cup champion, and the hero of a Napoli team still basking in glory. Now, the tournament would be held in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. His own backyard Italia 90 was supposed to be his coronation. The moment the King of Naples was crowned Emperor of the world, on his own soil. But this was not 1986. The Argentinian team he captained was a shadow of its former self, a cynical, defensive, battered army of survivors. They were without their star striker, Jorge Valdano. They lost their opening match to Cameroon in a stunning upset. It was Diego, scarred, limping, who had to rally them. They scraped through the group stage, won ugly, played uglier. This was not a team of romantics, they were a gang of street fighters, and they were booed and disliked in every city they played in. In their final game against Romania, it was Diego who orchestrated a strike for Pedro Monzon, but in doing so, took a crunching blow to his ankle, a wound that would haunt him thereafter.
Round of 16, and the eternal rivals, Brazil, awaited in Turin. Argentina and Diego were written off. The Brazilians dominated Careca and Dunga, both went close. They chopped and body-checked Maradona whenever he got the ball. Brazil hit the bar twice and a goal seemed inevitable. But the maestro had other plans. 10 minutes from the end, he took the ball on the halfway line and drove forward past two defenders. Then, as sly as a fox, he squeezed the ball through a defender's legs and released Claudio Kennedy for the decisive goal that was the genius of Maradona. Later, rumors swirled of holy water. A sedative slipped to the Brazilians, but whatever transpired, it was Maradona's vision, and Kennedy's cool, that won the day. The quarter-final in Florence, against a gifted Yugoslavia side, was a brutal, ugly war of attrition. The Yugoslavs had talents like the sublime Robert Prosinecki, the elegant Dragan Stojkovic, and the veteran playmaker Safe Sušić, a midfield that could weave patterns around anyone. The script seemed written for Argentina when, after just 31 minutes, Yugoslavia's Refik. Shabanajovic was shown a second yellow card for a foul on Maradona, of course, and sent from the field. It was a gift-wrapped invitation to the semi-finals, but for the next 90 minutes a strange paralysis set in Argentina, with the extra man, probed and prodded, but the rhythm never arrived. Both sides had chances. And Jorge Berrucaga had a goal disallowed for handball. The match remained locked at 0-0 through extra time, a monument to frustration. And so, it went to penalties, where Maradona stepped up to take the third penalty. It looked like he would guide Argentina to a 3-1 lead, but the shot, it was tired, flat. And Tomislav Ivkovic, the Yugoslav keeper, gratefully saved it. The hero had faltered, but his miss only set the stage for another kind of savior, the unexpected one. Argentina's keeper, Sergio Goycochea, a stand-in for Neri Pompido, sidelined by a broken leg, was a man who seemed to grow 10 feet tall during shootouts. He stood firm, saved 2 crucial spot kicks, and dragged his country through. 3-2. It was ugly. It was savage. It was pure dumb luck. It was survival. Then came the seismic semi-final in Naples, against Italy. The city was torn in two for a week. Maradona waged a psychological war. He reminded Naples how the rest of Italy scorned them, how they were only considered Italian when it suited the powers in the north. He asked for their loyalty, asked them to choose him, their king, over their country. No match was more fraught than that semi-final in Naples. Against Italy, Maradona had waged a psychological war, reminding Naples how the rest of Italy scorned them, welcome only when the North found them convenient. He asked for their loyalty, to choose him, their king, over their country. At the Stadio San Paolo, a stadium split in two, fans roared with conflicted devotion, the tension crackling in the air like a live wire. Italy, a fortress marshalled by Zenga, Baresi, and Maldini, that not conceded a goal in the World Cup yet, and they struck first in the 17th minute. The tournament's hero, Salvatore Toto Schillaci, pounced on a rebound to score, breaking the deadlock. But Diego, limping yet unbowed, began to orchestrate. In the 67th minute, he engineered a sweeping build-up that ended with Giulio Latticucci ascending in a looping cross Claudio Gimnasia. With his shock of blonde hair rose high above Zenga to head the ball home, shattering Italy's record-breaking 5-on-7 7-minute wall of invincibility. The great Roberto Baggio was brought on from the bench by the Azzurri. But the only magic he could conjure was to induce a red card for Argentina's Riccardo Giusti, leaving them with 10 men for the remainder of a tense extra time. To penalties, the first 6 were scored. Then Goicoechea spectacularly saved Roberto Donadoni's effort. Redemption beckoned for Maradona after his miss in the quarter-final. He stepped up, faced his club rival Zenga. He walked to the spot and calmly slotted the ball home. The Argentine goalkeeper, Goicoechea, again proved the hero, saving Aldo Serena's powerful penalty. Argentina won the shootout 4-3. They had knocked Italy out of their own World Cup. In that moment, the love affair died, the adoration of a nation curdled into venom. He was no longer a Neapolitan god. He was Judas for Naples. It was bittersweet. Their adopted son had shattered the heart of their homeland on their own soil. The final in Rome, against West Germany, was not a football match. It was a public execution. The atmosphere in the Stadio Olimpico was thick with malice. The largely Italian crowd, still bitter from the semi-final, joined the Germans in viciously whistling and jeering the Argentine national anthem. The cameras found Maradona, tears welling in his eyes, visibly mouthing curses back at the stands. His kingdom had turned on him completely on the pitch. It was a battle of attrition. Argentina were a ghost of a team. Exhausted, depleted, with 4 key players, including the explosive Claudio Caniggia, suspended for the final. Maradona, already playing through immense pain, was caged. He was shackled by the relentless man marking of Guido Buchwald, who followed him like a shadow, offering no space for magic. The game was ugly, brutal, and cynical. Germany were dominant, creating chance after chance. Argentina also became the first team in history to have a player sent off in a World Cup final. When Pedro Monzon lunged in on Jurgen Klinsmann in the 65th minute, the foul itself was reckless, studs up. But Klinsmann's reaction became the stuff of legend. A spectacular theatrical leap into the air, followed by a series of agonized rolls on the turf that certainly seemed to help the referee make up his mind. Monzon was shown a straight red card, and Argentina were down to 10 men. Argentina also became the competition's first finalist not to score, with only 1 shot on goal, their claims for a penalty in the 78th minute waved away. Then, in the 85th minute, the decisive moment arrived. West Germany's Rudi Völler went down in the box under a challenge from Roberto Sensini. The referee pointed to the spot. It was a soft, dubious, and hugely controversial penalty. But it was given. Andreas Brehme stepped up and coolly slotted the ball past Sergio Goicoechea, whose penalty-saving heroics had finally run out. It was 1-0. 2 minutes later, Argentina's despair boiled over, as Gustavo Dezzotti was also sent off, leaving a ragged, furious team of just 9 men to see out the final moments. At the final whistle, Diego collapsed. The camera zoomed in on the wreckage, as tears of pure, undiluted heartbreak streamed down his face. A king, dethroned and humiliated in his own realm, weeping for a crown he knew he could never win back. And yet, even in defeat, his legend shimmered. He generated half of Argentina's total shots, dribbled 90 times, more than any other player, was fouled 53 times, the most in the tournament, and was directly involved in 10 of Argentina's 14 goals despite the heartbreak. He was awarded the Golden Ball as tournament MVP. For Maradona, Italia 90 was both apex and abyss.
He carried a broken squad to the brink of glory, and in doing so, pushed himself beyond the soft places at age 30. Perched at the pinnacle, something inside him gave way. By the night in Rome, the unraveling had begun. The only way now was down. Chapter 9. Expulsion from Eden. When Diego Maradona returned to Naples after the 1990 World Cup, the air had changed. The love of Naples itself remained fierce, defiant. Even but beyond the city limits, he was now the most hated man in Italy. He was no longer a protected asset of Syria. He was a scapegoat. The authorities, the media, the powers that be who had once turned a blind eye now had their knives out. The shield was gone. His final season, 1990-91, was a long, joyless slog. On the pitch, the magic came only in brief, flickering spasms. He was often overweight, unmotivated. A king wandering listlessly through the halls of a decaying palace. And off the pitch, the walls were closing in. The police wiretaps, once a secret, were now leaked to the press. The paternity suit filed by the mother of his son, Diego Sanagra, was a constant public reminder of his personal betrayals. The gilded cage was shrinking. He was trapped. The end, when it came, felt both shocking and grimly inevitable. On March 17, 1991, after a match against Bari, he failed a doping test for cocaine. For years he had danced around the system, had been tipped off, had found a way to survive. But not this time. The system no longer had any reason to protect him. The fallout was swift and brutal. A crushing 15-month ban from all football warrants were issued for his arrest. He fled Naples in the dead of night, a king evaporating into myth. The expulsion from Eden was complete for a 30-year-old player whose body was already betraying him. Felt like a career death sentence. There was no grand fight, no defiant last stand. It was over. He was an exile, left with little but his demons and his infamy. When the ban ended in mid-1992, he tried to resurrect Maradona in Spain. A season with Sevilla under his old coach, Carlos Bilardo. There were flashes, free-kick magic, deft passes. But the body betrayed him. Knee injuries, diminishing stamina, and even a private detective hired by the club to trail his nightlife habits. All signs his empire was crumbling. The narrative moved back to Argentina, not to Boca, his spiritual home, but to Newell's Old Boys, a brief, flickering stint. 5 matches, a single goal. A desperate, clawing attempt to feel alive again, to get match fit for one last World Cup. His first training session drew 20,000 fans, a city erupting in hope, just for a glimpse of the returning king. He was working furiously with a personal trainer, trying to sculpt his ravaged body into the shape of a world-class athlete one last time, to lace up the boots and hear the roar one last time, to see if the legs could still carry the myth. He trained in silence, dragging the aching frame behind him, and looked toward one final act. And then the 1994 World Cup America, a tournament of billboards and corporate spectacle, not the spiritual theater of 86. But Maradona arrived like a prophet dragged from the desert, leaner, sharper, enraged. His eyes burned with the old fire,
He wasn't just back, he was defiant. Against Greece came the echo of a god, a 1-2, a thundering left foot strike. And then the sprint, not to the corner flag, not to teammates, but straight into the lens of the world, eyes wide, mouth agape. He screamed into the camera as if casting a curse. I am still here. It was magnificent and vaguely terrifying. But the high was short-lived, but that joy was short-lived. After the next match against Nigeria, the world watched the quiet, banal beginning of the end. A nurse in a white coat walked onto the pitch and gently led Maradona by the hand towards the doping control room. The final act was a blood test that found not one, but a cocktail of 5 different variants of the banned stimulant ephedrine. His tournament was over. He was sent home in disgrace. There was no trial, no slow fade. In the press conference that followed, a broken man faced the world. Me quitaron las piernas, he said, his voice thick with tears. They've cut off my legs, he told the world, a phrase soaked in operatic tragedy. Was it Diego, the broken boy from Villa Fiorito, sobbing into the night? Or was it Maradona, the mythic avenger, decrying the injustice of his fall? Probably both, always both. After that 15-month ban was served, there was one last time back in 1995. He returned home to the one place that would always welcome him, Boca Juniors. This was not the return of a king in his prime. It was the return of a living monument with a shock of peroxide blonde hair. He was a spectacle, a ghost of former glories running on fumes, nostalgia, and pure defiance. The old magic was mostly gone, but his presence alone could still fill a stadium. This final spell lasted 2 years, a chaotic mix of mentoring young players like Juan Roman Riquelme and battling his own demons. The end, when it came, was almost a perfect summary of his career. In August 1997, he failed another drug test. His final professional match, fittingly, was a Super Classico against River Plate on October 25, 1997. He was substituted at half-time 5 days later. On his 37th birthday, he officially retired from football for good. Chapter 10. The Exile Years. He retired on his 37th birthday in October 1997. But the story, of course, did not stop. The roar of the crowd was replaced by a silence he couldn't stand. And the discipline of the game gave way to the chaos of a life without an anchor. Cast out from football, Maradona retreated into his own private wilderness, a king without a court. Hounded by the media, who set up a permanent camp outside his Buenos Aires home, he became a cornered animal one sweltering afternoon in 1994, long before his retirement but already unraveling. He snapped, emerging from his house with an air rifle. He opened fire on the assembled reporters, injuring 4. It was not an attack, it was a cry. The paranoid, desperate act of a man defending a crumbling fortress with a child's weapon, lashing out at the circus he could no longer control. The ghosts of his past followed him into exile. The Italian tax authorities pursued him like a vengeful creditor of the gods, demanding millions in unpaid fines from his Napoli years, with interest compounding like wrath. Meanwhile, a more intimate torment lingered, the paternity suit brought by the mother of Diego Sinagra. His son born in Naples, Maradona continued to deny it publicly, leaving the boy to grow up haunted by the fame of a father who had rejected him. Without the structure of football, his addiction took a fearsome toll. His weight ballooned, his health, pushed beyond the limits of ordinary men for years, finally began to break. In January 2000,
While holidaying in Uruguay, he suffered a near-fatal cocaine-induced heart attack. A doctor who treated him recalled a man who was dying, in a coma, bloated and surrounded by sycophants with no idea what to do. Miraculously, he survived. That brush with death led him to an unlikely sanctuary. Cuba Fidel Castro, with whom Maradona had struck up a strange and theatrical friendship, welcomed him into the country as a revolutionary brother. For years, Diego lived in Havana receiving treatment at a health clinic, one rebel finding refuge with another, a fallen god among fellow exiles. Yet the cycle of self-destruction continued in 2004, another heart attack in 2007, hospitalization for alcohol-induced hepatitis. Each collapse was followed by a re-emergence, slimmer, repentant, full of promises. Gastric bypass surgery in Colombia, a stint in a psychiatric clinic. The cycle turned like a carousel he could not step off. By now he was no longer merely exiled from football. He was a man exiled from his own body, his own name, his own myth, Maradona. The superhero, the untouchable, had long since shattered into fragments. What remained was Diego, bloated, breathless, mortal, and yet not forgotten. Across Argentina and Naples and Cuba, across murals and stadium chants, the myth lived on. But in private, there were days when he would stare through the rehab clinic window, watching the wind ruffle a patch of grass beyond the wall, imagining perhaps the weight of a football on his toe once more. He had lived like no man should live, and somehow survived what no man should survive. But now, with the roar gone, the crown rusting in a drawer somewhere, he was a god in winter.
Chapter 11. The Sideline Spectacle. In 2008, after years wandering through his personal wilderness, the call came in a move that only Argentine football could stage. Diego Maradona was appointed manager of the national team. The god returned, not to the altar, but to the pulpit. What followed wasn't a coaching tenure. It was a 2-year piece of explosive performance art from the start. The World Cup qualifying campaign was chaotic, gloriously erratic. He summoned as many as 70 different players as though holding open auditions for the soul of a nation. There were moments of high farce and deep humiliation, none more so than a 6-1 thrashing in the high altitude of La Paz at the hands of Bolivia, a result Diego would later call a dagger in my heart. Losses to rivals like Brazil and Paraguay followed. The team was on the brink of failing to qualify for the first time in 40 years. The campaign came down to the penultimate match, against Peru in Buenos Aires in a torrential biblical downpour, with the score tied and Argentina's hopes washing away. The veteran striker Marcin Palermo poked home a scrappy, improbable goal in the 93rd minute to win the game. Maradona, wearing a tracksuit that was soaked through, celebrated with a theatrical, rain-soaked belly slide across the turf, a moment of pure, unadulterated relief and joy. Even then, they still needed a result in their final match, away to their fierce rivals, Uruguay. They won a tense, ugly game. 1-0. They had made it. Somehow, through clenched teeth and divine stubbornness, they had made it.
After the match, Maradona, vindicated, turned to the cameras and delivered a rant of pure, uncut defiance to the journalists who'd criticized him for months. They can suck it and carry on sucking it. FIFA promptly banned him for 2 months for the outburst, but the point had been made. He hadn't returned to play the game, he had returned to rage against it. And then, South Africa, the 2010 World Cup. He arrived not as a coach, but as the main attraction, dressed in a tailored grey suit, a watch on each wrist. Maradona prowled the touchline like a prophet in exile. He handed out theatrical 10-second hugs to players. He ran over a journalist's foot with his car and then berated the man for standing in his way. He once halted a press conference because he thought young German midfielder Thomas Müller was a ball boy. The world laughed and adored him. He didn't coach with tactics. He coached with tenderness, with fury, with love. He didn't select formations. He anointed believers. And for a time in the South African winter the church held, they cruised through the group stage with a perfect record, playing with a joy and swagger that seemed to flow directly from the man on the sidelines.
First, a tense 1-0 victory over Nigeria, secured by an early diving header from Gabriel Hines. It was a match where Lionel Messi was brilliant, only to be denied time and again by the heroics of the Nigerian goalkeeper. Then came the explosion, a rampant 4-1 demolition of South Korea, where the striker Gonzalo Higuain scored a superb hat-trick. It was a display of pure, attacking firepower, a team playing with the confidence of a king behind them. With qualification already secured, he rested key players for the final group game against Greece. He handed the captain's armband to a young Lionel Messi for the first time in a major tournament, a symbolic passing of the torch. They won 2-0 with a fairy tale late goal from the veteran, Martin Palermo, the man whose miracle goal had gotten them to the tournament in the first place. 3 games, 3 wins, 9 points. It wasn't just working, it looked like destiny. But spirit cannot hold shape. Emotion can't track runners. In the quarterfinals, they ran headlong into Germany, a younger, faster, and deadlier machine. The dream began to unravel almost immediately. In just the 3rd minute, from a free kick, Thomas Müller, the very player Maradona had mistaken for a ball boy weeks earlier, glanced a header into the net. What followed was a tactical masterclass from the Germans, their midfield, marshaled by the brilliant Bastian Schweinsteiger, overran Argentina's Lionel Messi. The world's best player was isolated, a ghost in the game. Maradona's strategy, which seemed to consist of faith, love, and vibes, was exposed as tragically naive. In the second half, the dam broke completely. Germany scored 3 more times, each goal a clinical, ruthless illustration of their superiority. The striker Miroslav Klose scored 2, a poacher's brace. Even the central defender, Arne Friedrich, bundled 1, in after a magnificent, weaving run from Schweinsteiger.
It was no contest. It was a four-cracker dismantling, swift and absolute. The dream lay in pieces. After the final whistle, Maradona walked onto the pitch and embraced his weeping players. One by one, he left the field with his arm around his young goalkeeper. Sergio Romero, head down, suit soaked, defeated, but still a defiant father to his broken team. His contract was not renewed. The decision stung. He lashed out at the association. Betrayal was his refrain. The king had returned, held court, and been cast aside once more.
Chapter 12. Pilgrim without a map. After the drama of the national team, the top clubs of Europe did not call the phone once hot with offers and adoration, fell silent. So Maradona became a pilgrim without a map, embarking on a nomadic journey through the far reaches of world football, a king in exile, wandering from court to court, searching for somewhere to matter again. In 2011, he landed at Al-Waz in Dubai. The move had the scent of spectacle from the start. The football was secondary. He was a living, breathing circus come to town. His translator would later recall how Diego, mid-press conference, would close his eyes and pretend to snore, theatrically bored, before snapping awake to deliver a jab at his old rival, Pelé. The chaos wasn't just for the cameras. It spilled onto the pitch and into the stands. In one notorious incident, he climbed into the crowd to confront fans he felt were bothering his family, getting into a heated argument and even kicking at one man's hand. He got into touchline shouting matches with opposing coaches, and in a moment of pure farce, he fielded a goalkeeper already serving a 17-match domestic ban. The keeper, true to form for this chaotic era, head-butted an opponent and was promptly sent off. It was theatre, not tactics, and the results reflected that the team finished a disappointing 8th in the league and lost in a cup final after just one season. The club's board had seen enough of the circus. Maradona was unceremoniously sacked. The wandering continued after a stint managing a second-division side in the UAE. He reappeared in Twitter in 2018 in perhaps the most surreal postscript of all. He was appointed honorary chairman of Dynamo Brest in Belarus, signing a 3-year contract to oversee the club's strategic development. His arrival was pure Diego, a piece of theatre bordering on the absurd. He rolled into the stadium for his presentation, not in a sensible club car, but perched atop a massive black amphibious vehicle called a Hinter. It looked like something designed to survive the apocalypse, or perhaps just a very difficult Tuesday in Minsk. He sat there, waving like a Bond villain who'd just taken over the world and was feeling pretty good about it. They gave him a sash and a giant loaf of bread. And he looked, for all the world, like the winner of a very, very strange village fete, wearing a watch on each wrist, a bizarre fusion of local custom and his own larger-than-life persona. At the press conference, he reeled off his friendships with Fidel Castro and Muammar Gaddafi, then paused to announce his next dream. Now I want to do a photograph with Lukashenko. When asked if he feared the famously harsh Belarusian winter, he scoffed. When I was small, he said, I had no shoes, I walked barefoot. So I'm not afraid of snow. And then, after all the pomp, the armored vehicle and the 3-year contract, he was gone. He left almost immediately, never truly fulfilling the role. The entire spectacle was just that, a spectacle. A brief,
bizarre, an unforgettable performance from the Pilgrim without a map. No titles, no trophies, no legacy building. But even here, in the frost-bitten fringes of the game, the slum boy from Villa Fiorito still refused to bow. Still wrote his own myths, still lived with fire. His map was long gone. But the pilgrimage continued.
Chapter 14. The Throne at Gimnasia. His final journey was a homecoming. After all the wandering through the deserts of Dubai and the strange, snow-dusted theater of Belarus, the pilgrim without a map finally found his way back to a familiar place, not to the giants of Boco River, but to La Plata, to a humble club called Gimnasia Eskrima, a team more famous for its passion than its points tally, a club locked in a desperate, clinging on by your fingernails relegation battle. The news of his appointment in September 2019 didn't just make waves. It was a tectonic event. It was like hearing a retired astronaut had agreed to fix the plumbing at the local library. It made no sense. And yet, it made all the sense in the world. The city of La Plata simply erupted. Thousands of new members joined the club overnight, paying their dues not for the promise of victory, but just for the right to be near the sun one last time. For his first training session, 25,000 fans packed the stadium. 25,000. For a Tuesday morning kickabout. They came to witness his presence, and he arrived, hobbled by recent knee surgery, not by walking, but by being driven onto the pitch in a golf cart. A battered king on a modern-day chariot, looking less like a football coach and more like a Roman emperor surveying a slightly disappointing, but very enthusiastic new province. Moved to tears by the reception, he addressed the crowd, his voice thick with the emotion of a man who had finally come home, but the words themselves, they were pure, uncut fire from the old days. Here, he growled into the microphone, the one who does not train, or who does not run, does not play. The results at first were disastrous. They lost his first 3 games, of course they did. Reality has a funny way of trying to assert itself. But then, something shifted. They didn't suddenly start playing like Brazil 70. They started playing like a team possessed by the ghost of Diego Maradona, which in a way they were. They started playing with fire, with bite, with an unshakable belief that the man on the sidelines could bend the universe to his will. He coached not with a whiteboard, but with a hug, with a glare, with a whispered memory of what it felt like to fight for something. And then, there was the throne. In a moment of pure, magnificent Argentine football theater, the club provided him with a custom-made throne to sit on during games. And it wasn't just a fancy chair, it was a statement. A plush, high-backed captain's chair upholstered in the finest blue and white leather with the club crest and his name embroidered on it. It was less a piece of dugout furniture and more something you'd expect to see in a slightly mad king's private sitting room, where he sits to watch the television and shout at the news. A king holding court on the touchline one last time, plotting the downfall of a mid-table side from a leather-bound seat of power. And here in this final unlikely stop, something truly strange happened. He found a measure of peace. The circus was still there, of course, The cameras, the reporters, the sense of constant event, but inside the tent, the ringmaster was finally sitting down his fitness coach. Javier Sordoni said Gimnasia became an oasis for him. I saw him eat, dance, listen to music, and cry because of love, he recalled, and I saw him happy. He was no longer the embattled global icon, the raging Maradona of the press conference. He was simply Diego, beloved, surrounded by his people, coaching a humble team who adored him. The season continued, a scrappy, emotional fight for survival. And then, the world stopped. The pandemic brought a strange, unnatural silence. Football was suspended. And in a final cosmic twist, the Argentine Federation cancelled relegation for the season. His team was saved, not by a last-minute goal, but by a global health crisis, which, when you think about it, is perhaps the most Maradona-esque plot twist of them all. As one fan so beautifully put it, Diego fell in love with Gimnasia before he passed on. He fell in love, then left this world with a smile on his face, simply due to having got to know this club. After a lifetime of glorious, chaotic, globe-trotting war, after all the noise and fury, the old soldier had finally found a quiet place to sit down on his very own throne and just watch the football. He had found a home. The piece he found at Gimnasia was a borrowed piece. A brief sunlit afternoon before a long and gathering dusk on his 60th birthday, in October of 2020, he attended their match. He didn't prowl the touchline from his throne. He could barely walk. He looked frail, a ghost haunting his own party. The fire that had burned for 6 decades was now just embers. A few days later, the news broke. A subdural hematoma, a blood clot on the brain, a phrase that sounds as heavy and final as a slammed door. He was rushed to hospital for surgery, one last fight for the old warrior, this time against the shadows in his own mind, and because he was Maradona, he won. The surgery was a success. He pulled through once again, defying the odds. The world exhaled. Another resurrection, another miracle. It seemed the script would never end. He was moved to a rented house in the town of Tigre to recover. Not a palace, not a fortress, just a house. The roar of the crowd was replaced by the quiet hum of recovery. The thunder of the Stadio San Paolo traded for the hushed tones of the nurses. For a man who had lived his entire life in the center of a hurricane, the silence must have been deafening. And then, on the 25th of November, 2020, the final whistle blew, not on a pitch under the glare of floodlights, but in a quiet room. The heart that had beaten for a nation, that had withstood the kicks and the chaos, the adoration and the addiction. A heart that had been pushed to the very edge of what a human heart can endure. Simply stopped. A silence fell over Argentina, a profound, stunned silence that lasted for a few minutes. And then a roar, a sound of pure collective grief that rose from every neighborhood, from every city. The country declared 3 days of national mourning in Naples, a city that had adopted him as its own furious, beautiful son. The lights of the stadium were switched on to burn through the night, illuminating an empty pitch, a vigil for a king. His death was as chaotic and contested as his life. Even in grief, the circus refused to leave town. Accusations flew as devations were launched into his medical care. Lawyers appeared, as they often do, like seagulls following a trawler, to pick over the details of his final days. The story, it seemed, was still being written, fought over, monetized. But away from the noise, a simple truth remained. The boy from the sewer who was lifted to the stars, the man who had carried the weight of his own statue for half a century, had finally laid his burden down. The myth, now, would have to walk on its own. Diego, the boy who loved his mother and slept with a football, was gone.
Chapter 16. The Flawed God. To understand Diego Maradona is to understand the eternal conflict between two people trapped in one body. Diego, the boy from the slum, and Maradona, the global icon. His former fitness coach, Fernando Signori, captured this duality perfectly. With Diego, I would go to the end of the world. With Maradona, I wouldn't take a step. His childhood friend, Elmano Rodriguez, put it even more simply. I knew Diego, the one who made Maradona famous. Diego was the boy who slept with a football like it was a second heart. He was the loyal friend, the loving son who would give his dinner away just to see his mother smile. The humble teammate who would fight for his brothers. Maradona was the mask. The conjurer, the arrogant performer. The statue built in real time, brick by headline, chant by chant, and once it was built, the poor lad had to carry it everywhere he went. He was adored, yes, but never gently. He buckled under the impossible weight of being a god. His legacy is as much political as it is sporting. He was the ultimate champion of the people, a man who never forgot his roots in the poverty of Villa Fiorito. He was a strident and lifelong critic of the establishment, whether it was FIFA or the Vatican. After a visit to Rome, he famously railed against the church's hypocrisy, saying, "I went in and saw the golden ceiling, and I thought to myself, how can he live with a golden ceiling and then go to poor countries and kiss the boys with the belly like that?" He was the champion of the people, a slum kid who saw the cathedral roof made of gold and asked why it couldn't be melted down. He called out the Vatican's hypocrisy, thundered at FIFA's greed, and stood with Castro Chavez, the outcast and the angry. He was no saint, but he was sacred.
He forged deep friendships with leftist political leaders, like Cuba's Fidel Castro, whom he called his second father, and Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, seeing them as fellow rebels fighting against imperialism. For millions of poor and oppressed people across the globe, his victories were their victories. When his underdog Napoli team defeated the wealthy northern giants, or when Argentina beat England, it felt like the side of the poor was striking a blow against the seemingly invincible rich. It wasn't just football. It was resistance, a nutmeg at the gates of empire. In the end, Maradona's monumental flaws are inseparable from his legend. They do not diminish it. They make it more powerful, more resonant, and more profoundly human. He was never meant to be a perfect role model. He was a flawed God for a flawed world, a man who reflected our own imperfections back at us, but who also showed us that divinity could be found in the mud. As the coach Pep Guardiola once paraphrased, "It doesn't matter what you did with your life, but what you did with ours. It made people happy." And that is why Diego Armando Maradona, the boy from the sewer who was lifted to the stars, the boy who juggled oranges like sacraments, the God who scored with his fist, the man who wore his myth like an old shirt that never quite fit, is, and always will be, immortal. Sleep well, dear listener. Dream of impossible slaloms through fields of mesmerized defenders. Dream of a football that refuses to touch the ground, tethered to a bootlace by pure magic. Dream of a shirt, sky blue and white, number 10, still hanging in a quiet room somewhere, not washed, just waiting. Dream of an entire city scorned and forgotten rising as one under a sky painted blue and white. And remember, as you drift off into the quiet hum of the night, the story of a boy from a shantytown who became a king, a god, a devil, and a man. Sometimes all in the same afternoon. Remember that sometimes a player becomes more than a player. They become a flag, a cause, a prayer whispered by millions. The flawed human vessel for a city's defiance and a nation's hope. Good night from Lowerleagues, and thank you for joining us on this very long, very chaotic, and very sacred journey through the life of Diego Armando Maradona. We'll be back with another tale to help you drift off. But until then, watch the games and look for those moments when football stops being just a sport and becomes a story about all of us.